Its distinctive houses of worship can be seen all over the world. Every year, hundreds of new ministers are being ordained. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people in different countries listen to its teachings and are joining the church. And it has helped millions of people through its humanitarian efforts, setting world records in the process. Registered in the Philippines on July 27, 1914, it is now well established in more than 110 countries and territories, with members from over 110 races and nationalities. This is the Iglesia ni Cristo, the Church of Christ. Questions have been asked for years about the Iglesia ni Cristo's amazing success. In 1992, in an article published in Philippine Panorama, Robert C. Villanueva, a journalist, wrote, "The Iglesia ni Cristo, a dynamic and rapidly expanding church. For many years now, theologians and critics have tried to pry open the secrets which propelled the Iglesia ni Cristo to such tremendous growth. Why are people attracted to it? Why does it grow so fast? Its cathedrals and chapels are impressive landmarks in all of the provinces, cities, and towns. Tracing the history of the Iglesia ni Cristo takes us to where it all began, the Philippines. For nearly 4 centuries, Philippine history was dominated by only one church, the Roman Catholic Church. But as the 20th century approached, revolutionary changes were already brewing. 1896, Philippine national hero Jose Rizal was executed by the Spanish colonizers under the influence of the Catholic friars. The cry for Philippine independence was heard. A revolt of the Filipino people against Spain was soon followed, however, by colonization by the United States of America and the arrival not only of American troops, but also American Protestantism.
Philippines is unique in its Catholic history because by 1898, 1899, the Americans have come in and established an American empire. The predominant religion would be Protestant churches, Congregationalist, Anglican, Episcopalian.
In the midst of these changes, a young Filipino man from a poor barrio in the outskirts of Manila, Brother Felix Y. Manalo, began preaching about the Iglesia ni Cristo. It was November 1913, and workers of Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific Company in Punta Santa Ana, Manila, were the first to listen to his preaching. Those who believed were baptized in a nearby river and constituted the pioneering members of the first local congregation of the Iglesia ni Cristo, the local congregation of Punta Santa Ana. Brother Felix Manalo's unyielding conviction to teach only from the Bible became well known around Manila, and many were attracted to the words of God delivered by this dynamic young preacher. The Iglesia ni Cristo's membership began to grow, but this early success did not sit well with the communities where the propagation of the church began. Neighbors were wary of these non-Catholic teachings he was bringing. If some had accepted the various American Protestant sects, when a fellow Filipino coming from the poorer, less educated sectors of society began teaching something far different from what they were used to, most reacted, even with hostility. Many of the early members were laughed at by their neighbors for listening to a poor, fellow Filipino. Some were even rejected by their family members for joining the Iglesia ni Cristo. One form of persecution was to question the legality of the church's existence. Since there were already baptized members, Brother Felix decided to register the Iglesia ni Cristo to make it a legal entity. On July 27, 1914, Brother Felix went to the office of the Division of Archives, Patented Properties of Literature, and Executive Office of Industrial Trademarks to register the church with the Philippine government. The date could not have been more prophetic. Unbeknownst to most of the world, let alone the Philippines, the Austrian army launched a sneak attack on Serbia in the early morning hours of July 27, 1914, and war was declared on that same day. This war would be known as the First World War.
World War I is an interesting war in its origins and its causes. Then it got out of control for 4 years with trench warfare, the first airplanes used in war. The impact of World War I, even in its deaths, its technology, would have lasted throughout the 20th century.
Even with the church registered, the persecution did not end. In fact, it increased even further. The predominantly Catholic neighbors of the early church members would disturb the gatherings of the Iglesia Ni Cristo and the Bible studies by throwing stones or mud at the listeners. At times, Catholic community leaders would prohibit the church from conducting missionary works in public squares or plazas. Catholic leaders, underestimating Brother Felix, challenged him to public religious debates. Soon, they were joined by U.S.-trained Protestant pastors who also wanted to debate Brother Manalo.
Sasabihin nila, ano ka ba? Are you starting another denomination? So it would take a man of charismatic capability to start that. Yung missionary movement ba, nga support of the church comes from the outside. Kung wala yon, mawawala yan. Mawawala yung church.
As opponents of the young organization increased, other problems also began to pile up. The Church of Christ had no material wealth of its own and was not affiliated with any other organization. As a result, it had no source of financial support from the outside. With all these challenges, the Church of Christ faced serious problems. How would the church continue with the work of salvation? It had no sufficient funds. Powerful organizations were against it. What was the chance the church would survive and succeed? For inspiration and guidance, Brother Felix Manalo held on to a promise recorded in the Holy Bible. Thou whom I have taken from the ends of the earth, and called thee from the chief men thereof, and said unto thee, Thou art my servant. I have chosen thee, and not cast thee away. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. It was not only despite persecution. Some would say that it was because of the growing number of public debates brought on by the persecution that the Iglesia Ni Cristo membership prospered. Hundreds and hundreds were curious to hear Brother Felix preach, and many were convinced to accept the Bible-based beliefs of the church. With the rapid growth in membership, Brother Felix Manalo also established what was called ang klase, or the class, where he trained young volunteers to become ministers, effective helpers in propagating the words of God and edifying the church.
He is clearly a powerful personality, a decent administrator, if not a great administrator. He was very effective in training his lieutenants.
Ministers, evangelical workers, and church officers worked hand in hand with Brother Felix Y. Manalo. But the early pioneering ministers had no easy task ahead of them. Most did not have a high level of formal education. Like Brother Felix, many of those early ministers also came from poor families, and there was no visible means of financial support. They faced grave challenges in fulfilling their duties, such as hunger, fatigue, and being strangers to the places they would be sent. Brother Felix emphasized to those pioneering ministers the biblical message of Apostle Paul, a minister of the church during the New Testament times, who also had to endure so much for the sake of preaching God's words. I have become its minister, according to God's administration that was given to me for you, to make God's message fully known. We proclaim him, warning and teaching everyone with all wisdom, so that we may present everyone mature in Christ. I labor for this, striving with His strength that works powerfully in me. Holding on to these biblical truths, the ministerial workers of the church led by Brother Felix Manalo never stopped sharing the truth and taking care of the church. More people embraced the true faith, and local congregations were established. The church grew at an unexplainable rate, no matter how the other religions sought to prevent it, challenging the church workers in debates or influencing government officials to suppress their freedom to proclaim God's words in public places. Brother Felix Manalo, with only a handful of ministerial workers, worked day and night to make sure that the faith of the members would be strong enough to survive hardship and persecution. But with so few of them to oversee, how could they make sure the members would not be led astray from the faith by preachers from other religious groups, or be strong enough to withstand the severe persecution and still remain in the church? The task was pressing. Failure to resolve this would lead to the collapse of the church. For an answer to these daunting challenges, Brother Felix Manalo looked once again to the Bible and guidelines that were given to Moses in establishing the first nation of God. Your job is to teach them the rules and instructions, to show them how to live, what to do. And then you need to keep a sharp eye out for competent men who fear God, men of integrity, men who are incorruptible, and appoint them as leaders over groups organized by the 1,000, by the 100, by 50, and by 10. As overall administrator of the church, or the church's first executive minister, Brother Felix organized the administration of the church. Members in a particular geographical area with a house of worship as a centralized worship location, he formed into a local congregation. Over each local congregation, he placed one of the newly trained ministers along with a volunteer deacon from the congregation as a head deacon to assist the minister in caring for the brethren. As the church began spreading to neighboring provinces outside Manila, he grouped the local congregations of each province into ecclesiastical districts and assigned more seasoned ministers to oversee the districts. It was the supervising or district minister who was tasked to directly oversee the ministers in the local congregations, solve the more difficult problems, and report the overall condition of the district's local congregations to the executive minister. Through this system of centralized administration, Brother Felix Manalo was able to maintain the unity of the church's teachings. Once again, Brother Felix had looked to the Bible for guidance and inspiration in overseeing the church. Even for non-members, the Iglesia ni Cristo's unity has become a distinct hallmark of the church. In the worship service lessons and programs for the worship service, the whole church is united,